India and the world is battling the coronavirus or the COVID-19 pandemic. There is much talk about vaccines and are they the magic bullet to control the coronavirus pandemic. There are many different types of vaccines, not just one, several different platforms, some tested, some completely untested. To get a primer on these vaccines which are there for corona and the various platforms which are there as to what could be useful towards controlling the pandemic, we have with us Dr. Gagandeep Kang. Uh, she heads the Translational Health Science Institute for India, THSTI, and better known for having developed India's indigenous rotavirus vaccine. So अगर कहा जाए तो वैक्सीन की गुरु हैं. Dr. Kang, can you explain to us what the vaccines are and what the candidates are, what the platforms are, which have been tested, which have not been tested, and how difficult or easy would they be to bring it to the Indian population? I will step out and you can continue. You can remain in the frame because you are the boss in telling everybody what the vaccines are.
Sure. So, to understand vaccines, you have to have an understanding of the organism that causes the disease and how the body responds to it. So, perhaps I can do this by doing some diagrams that show you what the various kinds of vaccines are. And to start with, we will see what the virus looks like. And the virus basically is a bag, and that bag has spikes on the surface. That is why it is called a coronavirus. It looks like the sun. And within this bag, which is made up essentially of proteins, you have a very long genome, an RNA genome inside. So, when you think of making a vaccine, what you can do for making vaccines in the old traditional style is to use the whole virus or to use a part of the virus. If you use the whole virus, you can use the virus alive or you can kill the virus and use it. So, if you think about a live virus, obviously you want a virus that infects, causes the body to respond, but does not cause disease. So, those kinds of vaccines are called attenuated vaccines. What you want is an attenuation or a weakening of the virus so that it causes infection, but not disease. The other thing that you can do is you can kill the virus, and a killed vaccine is also called an inactivated vaccine. And if we look in India, the first vaccine to go into clinical trials, Covaxin, made by Bharat Biotech, is a killed or inactivated vaccine. It consists of the whole virus, and that has been treated to make sure that the virus is dead so that it induces the immune response, but does not cause disease. Lots of vaccines have been made using this kind of technology, but what we know from this virus is that some parts induce an immune response better than others. And this area is called the spike protein of the virus. Most of the vaccines that are being developed based on the spike. Either the spike itself as a protein or a section of the genome that encodes for the spike. Now, if you look at the spike protein by itself, you can artificially make proteins in many kinds of cells. You can make them in bacteria, you can make them in fungi, you can make them in human cells as well. So, expressing the spike protein or a part of the spike protein is a way that vaccines are made, And one of the companies in India that's using that approach is a company called BioE. There are many other companies using this as well. Recently, we've had in the news many companies that are making a portion of the spike, which is just the tip of the spike, which is called the receptor binding domain, okay, or called RBD for short. So either you can have the whole spike or you have a part of the spike, and those vaccines are called protein vaccines, or they are called subunit vaccines. Now, the fancy new technology that is talking about vaccines is what is called RNA vaccines or DNA vaccines. And RNA vaccines are nothing but this, that you take a section of the genome of the whole coronavirus and you put it on a carrier. So then you have a carrier like this, and you have the part of the coronavirus genome that encodes for the spike protein. So if you look at it, the words that make up the sentence that tells you how to make the protein are copied here. So there is a copy of the RNA here. Now, when you have an RNA vaccine, what do? You give that RNA vaccine, and that vaccine goes inside a human cell. This is a cell with its nucleus. This is injected into the cell. What it does is it uses the cell. This RNA goes inside and it uses the machinery of the cell to make copies of the spike protein. Once the spike protein comes out, which is essentially this protein here, the body recognizes it and responds to it. So, what you've done is taken just the nucleic acid, the sequence, put it inside, and you've made the human who is responding to that vaccine become the maker of spike protein. DNA vaccines act in exactly the same way. You take the RNA out of the sequence of the RNA, you convert it into DNA, and you get the DNA to go inside the cell. That then becomes messenger RNA and results in the protein being produced again. So, the advantage of these is that actually you don't need the whole virus in order to be able to make vaccines that are based on DNA or RNA. All you need is the sequence. And we know that we had the sequence of the coronavirus on the 10th of January, and it allowed for Moderna, which was the first company, to make an RNA vaccine within 42 days of the sequence coming in and get that into humans. The advantages of these vaccines is you can make them quickly, like Moderna did. To do an inactivated vaccine or an attenuated vaccine takes a lot more time. There is one other approach to making vaccines, and that is called vectored vaccines. So, if we look at what's happening in India, the vaccine that is known as the Oxford vaccine, or the vaccine that is being made by Aurobindo Pharma, these are vectored vaccines. And in vectored vaccines, what you do is you take an unrelated virus, a virus that is not coronavirus, and into that virus and its genome, you introduce a bit of the sequence of the coronavirus. Now, we get viral infections all the time. Viral infections, what they usually do, and adenoviruses have a specific shape to them. This adenovirus will go inside a human being. The virus will get inside the cell. It will use the cell's machinery, and the end result will be the same thing as for DNA and RNA vaccines, that the cell will then make the spike protein, and the infected person's immune system will recognize that component of the coronavirus and respond to it.
So today India is using all these approaches?
India has inactivated vaccine, which is what is being made by Bharat Biotech. It has a DNA vaccine, which is the vaccine that is being made by Zydus, which is in human trials already. It has an RNA vaccine, which is being made by Genova. It has vectored vaccines with an adenovirus vectored vaccine being made by Serum, and a VSV vectored vaccine being made by Aurobindo. So we have all the technologies being used in India. We also have some very interesting technologies that are being discussed with other companies, like for example, Bharat Biotech is thinking about a vaccine that combines this coronavirus protein with influenza. So then you could have a respiratory virus vaccine. Bharat is also looking at a rabies vectored vaccine, and other companies are looking at measles vectored vaccines. So those might be 2-in-1 vaccines.
Okay, now let's now break it down. Traditionally, which are the kinds of vaccines which you and I have taken? Are they DNA or RNA vaccines, or they protein? Which are the kinds of vaccines which have a heritage on them?
So if we look at the vaccines that go into the national program, we could list the vaccines and go through what each of those are. So if you start with the vaccine you get at birth, BCG, this is a live attenuated vaccine. You take a look at oral polio vaccine. This is also a live attenuated vaccine. Now we are switching to an inactivated polio vaccine, which is a killed vaccine, right? And then you come to taking diphtheria, pertussis and tetanus. These are components of the bacteria that cause these infections. So in diphtheria and tetanus, we are taking the toxin. We are making the toxin weak enough to induce an immune response and not cause disease, but you are essentially giving a component of the vaccine. In pertussis, we are taking the whole organism and giving that whole organism. That's why our vaccine is called a whole cell vaccine. Now we have switched from DPT to pentavalent. In pentavalent, we also have Hib, which Hib is Haemophilus influenza type B, which is a conjugated vaccine, and we have hepatitis B, and hepatitis B is a protein vaccine. Like the RBD vaccines or spike protein vaccines we are thinking about, this vaccine also consists only of protein. Then you come to when you get older, you also have the rotavirus vaccine given at the same time, and that's like OPV, it's a live attenuated vaccine.
That's the vaccine you developed.
I did not develop it. Teams develop vaccines.
I get your
individuals
point. You
don't.
The team. But it's associated with you. Let's take it.
I work on rotavirus, but many people work on rotavirus.
Sure. But that's a live attenuated.
That's a live attenuated
and
vaccine.
That's where we have end-to-end experience.
Yes,
from
we do.
Developing it to taking it through trials and then bringing it into the national immunization program. Correct?
Yes. And for the first time, we are also measuring the impact of rotavirus vaccines. The results should be out this year, but it's the first time we have actually measured impact of newly introduced vaccines. Then you come to measles, and measles can be given along with mumps and rubella, and these are live viral vaccines. So there is a range of vaccines, but as you can see, there's a theme here. It's live vaccines, which are whole organisms, killed vaccines, which are whole organisms, and protein. So these are tried and trusted platforms that have been established for a long time and are very widely used. If we think about other vaccines that use slightly newer technology, the human papilloma virus vaccine is a new technology because it uses virus-like particles, essentially protein. So you get the outside the protein bag of the virus without the RNA, without the DNA in it, so it can't replicate.
So most of these are the heritage platforms are some way or the other actually organisms or proteins, correct?
That's correct.
So why have we not till date used DNA or RNA?
Because these are very new technologies.
So DNA and RNA have been around for so long.
DNA and RNA vaccines have not been around for so long. We started to try out DNA vaccines about 30 years ago, and those vaccines seem to work very well in animals, but we were unable to get a similar sustained immune response in humans. But there has been a lot of development of delivery technologies. How do you get this nucleic acid inside the cell? Because that seems to determine what the quality of the immune response is. With RNA, it has been even more challenging because RNA is very unstable. So you might have something that you could do easily as experiments in animals, but when you do it in humans, you don't realize it. It breaks down before it can get inside the cell and induce an immune response. So we've needed to change technologies a lot. There has been a lot of work on RNA vaccines and DNA vaccines for cancers as well as for infectious diseases. So some of the work is further advanced in cancer than in infectious disease.
So let me understand. That means none of the RNA or DNA vaccines have been deployed. Is that correct?
For infectious diseases, that is true. There are no RNA or DNA vaccines yet, but given the data that we have so far from phase 1 and now phase 2 studies, it does appear that the vaccines are safe, they are immunogenic, and they are inducing what we would expect to be a functional response. So when you have a virus, you can have two kinds of antibodies made to the virus, if you're looking at just antibody mediated immunity. The first is when you have binding antibodies, antibodies that measure whether they can attach to a protein or not. And then you have functional antibodies, and the functional antibodies are neutralizing antibodies. For most viruses, they serve as a correlate of protection. And it does seem like that the new nucleic acid vaccines that we are looking at are inducing a neutralizing antibody response. So there is a hope that they will work.
No, let's step back a little bit. How come in the last 6 months, RNA, DNA vaccines have become fashionable? Why? What has changed? Why did we have to look at this? But is this related only to the hype around COVID-19?
I think RNA and DNA vaccine platforms existed before COVID-19. So if you're looking at rapid response, when you have something where you want to make a response very quickly, have a vaccine out there, then these platforms give you the advantage that they have been evaluated for multiple diseases, and all you're doing is switching out this section. You can take any sequence and you can put it in here and test it. That means you can make it quickly, and that's why it's been something that has been of interest to many organizations that have looked at rapid response platforms like the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations. So they had already funded some of these companies to work on RNA vaccines, and they were therefore able to fund Moderna within days of the sequence being available.
Yeah, but see, the need for having rapid response was there in 2019 also. How come only for corona suddenly we are looking at DNA and RNA vaccines and in a way kind of forgetting the live attenuated and the protein vaccines?
We are not. We are looking at the totality of what may be an appropriate response. So, we do not know that an RNA or a DNA vaccine is going to work. We do not know that a protein vaccine is going to work, because at the moment we do not have efficacy data for any of the vaccines. All we have is safety data and immunogenicity data for the small number of vaccines that have now gone into humans. So, we have now over 20 vaccines that are in humans, and all of them so far seem to be safe and seem to be immunogenic. Now, the next step is, will they work to prevent disease? And that is what we hope to find out in the phase 3 trials that are being done.
See, normally, I'm pressing the gas on RNA, DNA vaccine because those are little understood. What is the fear? Is the fear that the DNA will get incorporated? So I take a DNA vaccine. Will my genetic structure change? Will it get passed on to my children? Is that the fear? Because will it get passed on into the evolutionary structure? What is the fear? Why was it not used? See, that's what people want to understand. Why now?
It
Why?
wasn't used because we didn't have technologies that made it work. It's not, is something going to happen where I don't understand the long-term consequences, because really we have looked at this in animal models for a while. And I think the kind of carriers that are being constructed now are not ones that are going to lead to long-term integration. The idea is that you should make this protein, it will be there for a while, long enough to induce an immune response, and then you're done. So, even among the vaccines that are being made, there are very many types. You can have a regular mRNA vaccine, you can have a self-amplifying RNA vaccine that gives you an increased signal. So, we don't know which ones are going to work, so we are trying everything.
Fair enough. So among the 3 or 4 candidates which we have in India, let's deconstruct one by one each one of them. Let's take for instance the Zydus vaccine. Now, in the Zydus vaccine, they are using a plasmid, if I'm not wrong, and that is something which is again untested in humans.
It's not untested in humans, it's a plasmid that is delivering DNA. So, the idea is, plasmids are there in bacteria, they're essentially extra chromosomal genetic elements. So, not your regular genome, but you will have an extra section of genome that can have some functional properties. Bacteria use them, for example, for antimicrobial resistance genes. So, here
but do humans have plasmids?
No, humans don't have plasmids.
So, we are going to inject something new into humans.
You get bacteria with plasmids every day, you've got plenty of them in your gut.
But they degenerate.
Yes, and so do plasmid. A plasmid is not going to survive outside of a cell. And for plasmids are circular pieces of DNA. And in this case, all we are using that piece of DNA is to introduce a new genetic element into the cell. Okay, so yeah, it's not something for us to worry about, because what happens when cells replicate is that you actually have proofreading mechanisms. If there is something that the cell does not recognize, it will cut it out. So, I don't think it's something that we should be worrying about. In the case of plasmids that have been artificially constructed to deliver this sequence.
Okay, assuming it works, and right now the Zydus vaccine, which is a DNA plasmid vaccine, has gone from phase 1 to phase 2 trial. Now, what is the regulatory mechanism for that? Because if I look at it, it is a genetically engineered vaccine.
Yes.
And it goes through the recombinant DNA, RCGM, I'm forgetting the expansion. I presume it has gone through that. And then what is the regulatory procedure?
So, for all nucleic acid vaccines or all vaccines that are made through any kind of genetic manipulation, you have to go through RCGM. And that's true in all parts of the world. You need a regulatory process that tells you that what you are doing is going to be safe. Now, DNA vaccines have not been shown to be effective, but they have been shown to be safe. So, this is something that has been studied for a really long time. If we look at the processes for regulatory approvals of vaccines, you have to go through lots of preclinical testing. And in the preclinical testing in India, you usually test in animal models and you're looking for safety signals in the animals. Then you go into phase 1 testing, which is testing in a small number of people. And you can do safety and immunogenicity together, but usually phase 1 will be safety, phase 2 will be immunogenicity, and then phase 3 is efficacy. So, in phase 1 usually you will have about 20 people, you will pick a group that is healthy, that does not have any issues, and about small numbers are appropriate. In phase 2 you will look at how many doses are required, what should the dosing be in each dose, and you will look at immune response. In phase 3 you will look to see, does this vaccine work against the disease that it is supposed to prevent?
Now, was it necessary for a DNA or RNA vaccine from RCGM to go to our Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee or the GEAC? Because it's getting into, as they say, the environment. Was it necessary?
I think with RCGM, so in the early phases of clinical testing, it's not getting into the environment, right? You are monitoring the people who are getting the vaccine very closely. So now with, I believe the Department of Biotechnology has set up a joint appraisal with RCGM and the DCGI together considering what vaccines are coming through. And I think that's a good way to do it because it shortens the timelines. You don't have to get separate approvals from different committees. So this allows you to get your studies done faster.
Sure, agree. Faster is good and we really need a fast response. But when you have external appraisal, see, one is sitting in the Department of Biotechnology and the other one is sitting in the Ministry of Environment and Forest. Well, isn't that a better approach?
Actually, DCGI is in the Ministry of Health. So you've got both science and technology and health looking at this. And in the early stages, what you're doing is clinical testing, preclinical testing and clinical testing in humans. So I don't know whether the approval process now requires GAEC. It would not be my expectation because there is a lot known about the different kinds of vaccines and how they perform and what they do inside at least animals and by inference in humans.
Now, how will we convince the larger Indian public to use an untested platform? DNA, RNA has not been used in the kinds of millions and billions of doses like we have for all these. How do we convince? Because end user and having him on board is probably the most critical step.
No, I think there's something that's important to understand. Whether it is a adenovectored vaccine or it is an RNA vaccine or it is a DNA vaccine, the immune response is to the protein. It's a different delivery mechanism for getting the protein into people, right? And getting the immune response made to that. So the spike or a portion of the spike is all you're really looking at. So I would not think about this as this is a DNA vaccine or this is an RNA vaccine. It's effectively you're making a protein and responding to that protein. And I think our immune system is marvelous in being able to respond in the ways that it does to induce protective immunity.
No, see, somewhere, I think, see, as scientists, you're looking at it as a technology, okay, and as a delivery platform.
Yeah.
But for the larger public, the understanding could be far different from what your deeper understanding of the situation is. So what I'm trying to understand is
Pallav, do
how
you
will we
eat
try?
ice cream?
I do eat ice cream.
Have you ever eaten Wall's ice cream?
Balls is something I don't like because it's not ice cream. It is what frozen dessert. So I don't eat Wall's
But it
ice
is
cream.
frozen, right? Now, one of the components of Wall's is actually a recombinant product.
What is that?
So when I was doing some work on rotavirus prevention and prophylaxis, I learnt that one of the things that goes into Wall's ice cream for making it into a frozen product is a protein that is made by recombinant DNA technology. And it's been in Wall's for 20 plus years, right? So there are many things that we eat, consume that don't get all this hype, even though they are products of genetic engineering.
No, products is understood. See, we already have genetically modified cotton in India, and India has become such a large producer. The farmers accepted that. It is a very largely accepted technology, right? Now, more than quality walls, etc. I think it's insulin which we are taking. Most people who are on insulin are taking
A
genetically
recombinant
product. But that is
Your
but-
hepatitis B vaccine is a recombinant
yeah,
product.
but that is you're not taking the RNA and DNA. You're still taking the
RNA
protein.
and DNA break down in no time. This is not something we need to worry about. Okay, in fact, you want to keep the RNA stable long enough for it to get inside a cell. So this is not something that should be a safety concern.
It should not be.
It should not be a safety concern. There have been enough studies that have been done that have looked at these vaccines. And it's very important to remember that for every vaccine, the safety monitoring does not stop. Even after the vaccine is licensed and the vaccine
phase
goes
4.
into people, it continues to be monitored. So there is no question that safety is a significant concern, but I don't think we should be thinking about safety about a particular class of products more than any others. You could be talking about inactivated vaccines, and there is the theoretical possibility of vaccine associated enhanced
Yeah,
respiratory
polio. We
disease.
see that in oral polio vaccine. We see that so often.
Not
They
so
have-
often, very rarely.
No,
Vaccines
no.
are made to be safe.
Compared to 1.3 billion Indians, you occasionally see a virus-induced, vaccine-induced polio is happening sometime or the other. That's why we
Rotavirus,
shifted to injectable polio vaccines. So again, how do we allay the fear if there is, which is going to creep up, and I'm sure it will creep up slowly but steadily in people, that this is a concern.
I think people like you have a great role to play in this, to tell people that, the whole process of testing of vaccines, if there was a safety concern, that vaccine would not go out there. There are risks with everything that you do. So you mentioned with your polio vaccine, you do get polio. With rotavirus vaccine, we know that intussusception happens. With influenza vaccines, you might develop Guillain-Barré syndrome. But when you know that there are risks like that, the benefit has to be so much higher than the risk that it becomes acceptable then to the community. The medical community is not interested in hiding if there is a safety concern. If there was, we wouldn't be thinking about developing those products. And that's also why we emphasize so much that safety monitoring needs to continue. You have to be communicating that these products are made to be safe and effective.
Now, that was the Zydus. Now, let's look at the biological E product, a product which is still not gone into phase 1 or 2 trials? What is that? Because that's also coming somewhere.
Well, it's like a lot of different companies are doing this, and we are also working on protein vaccines. It's essentially a small part of the spike protein. I drew you a picture of the coronavirus, which was like that, and this is just this part of the protein. This is the business end of the virus, because this is the, it's called the receptor binding domain because it binds to the human ACE2 receptor. If you can stop this binding, then the virus won't get inside the cell and it won't be able to multiply and you won't get disease. So, the idea is to induce neutralizing antibodies that stop the binding of the receptor binding domain with the receptor. And if you can do that, you in theory should be home safe.
And that's a protein vaccine?
That's a protein vaccine. It's just a little bit of protein that is what is carried on the tip of the spike. And in fact, if you look at all the other types of vaccines, whether it's vectored vaccines or RNA or DNA vaccines, they're all doing the same thing. They are resulting in the production of this little piece of protein.
And let's look at the much hyped Oxford vaccine, which is coming through the Serum Institute of India, where India has also proceeded to phase 2 and phase 3 trials. Now, what is that? Is that protein? Is that DNA? Is that RNA? Is that a tested platform?
It's a vectored vaccine. A vectored vaccine means you take a different virus and into that virus you put a little bit of the sequence for the spike protein. So, when the virus gets in, the purpose of a virus is to infect cells. Once the virus gets in and infects the cell, it takes over the host machinery and again makes that little piece of spike protein to which the body responds.
Now, is that something a tested platform or an untested? See, I'm deconstructing it for a lay person.
Yeah.
So, is that a tested platform? How many billion people have had an adenovirus vaccine till now?
The first licensed vectored vaccine is the Ebola vaccine. So, that was licensed about a year ago.
I thought that was not licensed.
It is licensed.
FDA gave clearance for using it without FDA clearance it was used. I'm not saying it was
that
wrong.
was in the trials,
Yes.
but it has subsequently been licensed. The Merck product is now licensed, and that is a vectored vaccine.
That means there's one vaccine
That
for
is
one disease, and for Ebola, which is a highly restricted disease in Western Africa. So I'm presuming it's not gone into, probably not even into millions of people.
No, it hasn't, but Ebola doesn't affect millions. The most outbreaks tend to be in the hundreds and the thousands rather than in the millions. So
is it safe?
So far, there seem to be no signals. It's safe and effective.
So that particular thing is now going to be put into trial in India.
So there have been lots and lots and lots of vectored vaccine constructs, and they have been evaluated in people, and so far there are no safety signals that have led to people saying we shouldn't be using this vaccine. If they had, then this would not be a platform that we would be using today. We are using a chimp adenovirus vector, and the reason for that is that humans will not have antibodies to a virus that came from a different species. So, it allows for us to be able to deliver the spike protein using a virus that humans have not previously seen.
So, there is hope in that?
Certainly, there is hope in that. So far, we have not had anything that has told us that any of the front runners in the vaccine race, if you can call it that, need to be dropped because of either a safety signal or a lack of immunogenicity. We don't know about efficacy yet, but that's why these vaccines are in trials.
Okay. Let's look at the third or the fourth candidate which we have from India, which is the candidate from Bharat Biotech, uh, uh, the same company where your rotavirus vaccine was multiplied, and roughly the same kind of effort, if I'm not wrong. Tell me a little bit about that particular vaccine.
So the Covaxin vaccine, which is in clinical trials at the moment, is an inactivated virus vaccine. It's derived from a strain that was obtained from the National Institute of Virology. And using inactivated vaccines is a tried and trusted technology. Whether it will work or not, we don't know, and we won't know till we have efficacy data. It's certainly in other inactivated vaccines like the ones made in China, it has been shown to be safe, it has been shown to be immunogenic, and it has been shown in animal models to protect from disease. So they had primate study data, and that vaccine has now been taken forward.
It has been given to humans in China, I'm told. Large numbers of that vaccine has been given to the Chinese army.
That's the vectored vaccine.
That's the vectored vaccine.
Yeah.
That's the kind of vaccine which Zydus is doing.
No, that's the kind of vaccine that Serum is doing.
The Serum Institute, the Oxford kind of vaccine. Okay. Now, in this particular, what are the other? Is there any other we have from India? Because
so we've got the, these are all the platforms that we have. Aurobindo has a different kind of vector. So among the vectored vaccines, we have Aurobindo's vector, we have Serum's vector, we have a vectored program with, I think Zydus was discussing it. I don't know if they took it further, but Bharat is considering a vectored vaccine as well. So there are lots of vectored vaccines being considered.
Now, at some point, see, you're not a person who's going to be making this decision. I know that. That's why I can throw this question to you, because you're not the Drugs Controller General of India, or you're actually not likely to become. I shouldn't say what may happen in the next month or so.
No,
I do not know.
No question.
See, if let's say all of these succeed, if you're saying all of them have shown safety and have shown immunogenicity, which one should India bank on? The vectored, the inactivated virus, the DNA or RNA plasmid? Which one do you think? I'm talking more in terms of not of specific companies, but the platforms.
A lot of effort goes into making decisions about which vaccine to use. But basically, you have to show that there is a disease burden, and clearly there is. You have to show that a vaccine candidate works. You have to show that the program is ready to absorb that vaccine, and you have to have a cost. Now, in terms of safety, if everything is equal, if in terms of efficacy, if everything is equal, and if the program can absorb the vaccine, then I think it comes down to cost. So, but you have to remember that the program absorbing the vaccine depends on a lot of things like cold chain space. Some of the vaccines that we are thinking about might require -80 storage. If it's -80 storage, then our system cannot take that vaccine.
Which are the ones which will need -80 degrees storage?
So I don't know about the Indian constructs, but some of the vaccines that are being developed outside the country are currently being tested in -80. So for example, the Ebola vaccine, when it first started out, they had to do the vaccine trial storing the vaccine in -80.
Let's look at the Oxford vaccine, that's the Serum Institute. Let's look at the Zydus and the Bharat Biotech, the three most advanced candidates. Will they withstand? Will they be able to go through a cold chain?
I don't think those are likely to have a problem, because the companies have been looking at the requirements for cold chain space. So if you take, for example, the rotavirus vaccines, if you look at the products that are in the market, between GSK, Merck and the Indian products, the Indian products actually use the smallest cold chain space, and that makes them more efficient for programmatic use. So, the others are given as single dose, we use multi-dose vials. So, all of these issues also play a role in determining whether a program can absorb a vaccine or not.
So there are many things which will come into play.
Yes.
It's not a very simple decision.
Yeah.
ये लग गया, ये चल गया, ये साफ है, इसको ले लो. There'll be many more complicated decision making.
Yes.
Now, there's one thing which people ask me repeatedly is the issue on testing. Now, there is the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 trials, and there is this new discussion about human challenge. Now, what is this human challenge? I don't think India has ever done a human challenge. And is this something?
Okay. Human challenge studies are very valuable in studying infectious diseases and in vaccine development. So, when you don't understand how a disease performs, usually you try to make an animal model for that disease. Now, sometimes, as we've learnt to our loss, that animals have a certain response to a pathogen that humans don't have. So, in fact, for rotavirus vaccines, we were led up the garden path completely because in animals, you need type-specific immunity. But in humans, one virus can protect against multiple viruses. We still don't understand why it is, but the entire first 20, 30 years of rotavirus vaccine development was based on animal models that told you that you needed multivalent vaccines. Now we don't know, we don't. Had we done the studies in humans earlier, we would have understood that much quicker. So, human challenge studies, when you think about them, give you a better understanding of infection and can also be used when you have multiple vaccine candidates. Then you can use a human challenge study in order to see which candidate you should take forward quickly, right? Now, the problem with, I don't think human challenge studies are necessarily wrong, because we do many things, it's the idea of doctors never do harm. And in this case, you're asking doctors to do harm by deliberately giving somebody an infection. But we deliberately do many other things, right? Plastic surgery could be considered deliberately harming somebody because they don't really need it. Kidney donation, you're harming the donor in order to benefit the recipient. So, there are situations where we deliberately harm people, and one way of thinking about that is, if there is harm, what is the benefit? And in the case of human challenge studies, there may or may not be benefit to the individual that participates in the study, but there is definitely benefit to society. Whether that is a better understanding of the disease or it is resulting in getting a product that is good for public health faster. But when you think about challenge studies also, when you are experimenting with humans, your first responsibility is always safety. How do you do this safely? How do you make sure that people are not harmed? So, in the malaria field, human challenge studies have become a filter. Right? You have a candidate that you think will make a good malaria vaccine, you have to put it in a human challenge and then it goes further. If it doesn't pass the human challenge, people drop their candidates.
But there is a drug for treating malaria.
Exactly. So, where
in corona we don't have that.
That is true. The argument is made that we also have human challenge studies for influenza. And for influenza, the drugs and quality are variable. There is also a dengue challenge model. We don't have a drug for dengue. But in dengue, the strain has been characterized to be a strain that only causes viremia, does not result in disease. So, the idea of doing human challenge, or as it is called, controlled human infection models, is you have control over every aspect. You use a strain that is not going to make people very sick. You monitor the people who come into the study very carefully. You monitor the people while they are in the study very carefully, and you monitor them afterwards. You want to learn about experiments, about infections, you want to learn about products, but you want to do it as safely as possible. We've never done these studies before in India. I think they have value. I think we should be doing them, but we should be approaching this with a great deal of caution. Perhaps the first studies we do should be the ones where we know that treatment exists.
So what you're suggesting is that India should do human challenge studies, but probably should not do for coronavirus? Is that what you're saying?
I think we are not ready for coronavirus challenge studies at this time. Will this change? Will we have a, right now I don't know what a challenge strain would look like. If we knew that the challenge strain was one that only causes asymptomatic infection, right, I'd have no problem with it. But then you need to put it into lots of people to show that this is a strain that only causes asymptomatic infection. Or we get an antiviral tomorrow. If we do, then that makes it a lot easier to think about it. So the WHO has developed guidance for thinking about challenge studies. It is, I think, sensible guidance because it takes into account a lot of factors. The fact that you should think about only using young people, nobody with comorbidities. Make sure that it's done by experienced investigators in places that have the opportunity to manage cases well. And every day, you know, we didn't know about remdesivir, we didn't know about dexamethasone 2 months ago. 2 months from now, will we have treatments? I don't know, I hope so. And that would make then challenge studies easier to consider.
If a drug comes, then the vaccine is automatically out.
No, that's not the case. Why would you want to have a drug that treats you when you are sick, when you have the opportunity to not be sick at all?
That's a point.
Yeah.
Now, on the same lines, there is one issue which several people have asked me. The two candidates which we have, the Zydus candidate and the Bharat Biotech candidate, both have gone through only animal testing in small animals. Monkeys, primates, they have not been tested. Now, is that a handicap?
I don't think it's a handicap. I mean, it's helpful information if you can show that you can prevent infection or disease in primates. But that doesn't mean that if it didn't work in primates, you would not go to humans at all. We know that for many infections, even though we are closely related to primates, we are not identical. So I think taking it into humans will give you answers. And so far, the answers that we have don't seem to give us any reason for stopping the study.
Fair enough. But do you think we should be reinvesting in our primate facilities? See, most of the people use rhesus monkeys. हमारा लाल मुंह वाला बंदर है, सब जगह मिलता है. आप, when I came to your institute, I saw hundreds of them outside.
That's right.
But we can't use them. What a strange paradox.
I don't think we can't use them. The processes are difficult, but they are difficult for all of animal testing. And primates, you know, there are primate facilities in the country, not many being used for infectious diseases, being used for other experiments. And I think while there is a necessity to decrease animal testing, and that includes small animals,
Sure,
as much as possible, if we really want to advance human health, we have to understand that At this time, it is still a necessity to have models of disease and ways of testing interventions before we come to humans.
So you think we should get back to having uh, non-human primate facilities in India, which is world class?
I think it depends on what we see ourselves doing. And if we see ourselves making, for example, vaccines for infectious diseases, it would certainly be something that we should be thinking about.
Prime Minister talks of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and if we are not Atmanirbhar in or self-reliant in our whole testing procedure, and for that one or two steps we have to step out to another country, and we want to be a major hub, we need to get back.
I think there are lots of things we need to build. And for me, even more than the animal facilities, we need to build the quality of our clinical research. The quantity and the quality of our clinical research has really not been where I think it should be. Investing in making sure that we have academic medical centers. Trials should not be done by your 20-bed clinic in the back of Beyond because they've been recruited by a CRO. Trials should originate from and be done in academic medical centers that are looking for the treatments of tomorrow. And this has become an absolute necessity in the rest of the world. And somehow we are not investing in that quality of clinical research that I think we should do.
But we are investing in, say, 5 or 6 sites. The National Biopharma Mission, that is probably where some of these major trials for phase 3 are likely to happen for coronavirus. Are they good sites? Are they well prepared?
So 5 sites for a country of 1.3 billion. If you look at the US right now, they are looking at trial sites for Operation Warp Speed. There are 5 vaccines in Operation Warp Speed. They have 140 sites.
140 sites.
That they have invested in over the last 30-40 years to build up. And when they have a crisis like this, they can access sites easily. So why in India, with 4 times the population, should we not be thinking about taking our 5 sites and multiplying them? You need community sites, you need hospital sites, you need sites that specialize in neurology, in respiratory disease. We have so many health problems. And we can't always be waiting for discoveries to happen in the West and then transferring them to India and then finding out, oh, the dose is not right, or this drug doesn't work for our populations. We should be doing our own clinical research.
Or like your case, when the vaccine was, I think, 20 or 30 times the cost of what the Indian vaccine finally was.
So, but I cannot take credit for the rotavirus vaccine, no question.
No, I'm taking the credit back from you. Okay, the team which did, but there is also that whole thing. There were $20 or $30 per dose, and India, when we did, we brought it down to, how much was it?
It's now at under 50 rupees a dose.
But under $1.
Yes.
So that was the kind of profit margins. And if we invest, we can save a lot more lives simply by investing in these sites?
I think we can save a lot more lives if we invest in our research ecosystem. So that means all the way from basic science to the kind of implementation research that needs to be done. What we want to do is improve health for everybody. And prevention, in the case of vaccines, is a big part of improving health.
So let's come back to the 3 or 4 Indian candidates on corona. 2 of them are RNA, DNA, vectored, and the other is an inactivated virus, one a tested platform. Would you bet on the inactivated vaccine as the likely candidate for India?
I'm not taking bets right now. I'd like for as many candidates as possible to succeed. Right now, I have no indication that one vaccine will do better than another. It's just a question of the stages at which all these vaccines are. So far, no signals to say that one is worse than the other, and no signals to say one is better than the other.
But you hope there will be a vaccine against corona. It's not as if we are ending into a black hole. Right
No.
now, looks there is light at the end of the tunnel.
I think there has never been such a concerted effort to develop new vaccines. It would be very unlikely that we would not succeed. Nothing is 100% till you actually have a vaccine and you know that it works in the populations for which it is intended. Given the biology of coronavirus, I'm very hopeful that we will come up with a vaccine.
I am delighted to hear that there is a likelihood to have a vaccine and there is light at the end of the tunnel. So that was Dr. Gagandeep Kang, the only, I shouldn't say her, but a team which developed an Indian vaccine against the rotavirus. So here is somebody who has experience in handling a virus and delivering a vaccine, saying that there is every possibility that there could be a vaccine against the novel coronavirus or the COVID-19. One question I didn't ask her was how soon, because I know that's very hard to answer. But the basic platforms where they are being studied is something she has explained and also given us hope that there will be a vaccine sooner than later. In Faridabad with Dr. Kang, this is Pallav Bagla.